welcome to another episode of Pixelperfect with me, Bert Monroy. Now, in the last two shows, I talked about my painting Damon. This show, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to close it off now and show you the last time I'm going to deal with Damon. Now, I have it here on my screen, right here on my little Wacom Cintiq, which I actually love working on this thing because it makes it so much easier. It's kind of like working the way I was traditionally trained, to actually look at my hand as it's moving on the screen. It's a much better way of working, a little more relaxed, more accurate too. Rather than looking at the screen and having your hand here on the side, I'm actually right on top of the screen, and there's something to be said about that hand-eye coordination, be able to look at your hand as it's doing things. Now, what I want to draw attention to it is some of the textures that are in this painting. I'll get in close over here, way over here to this little sign on the edge over here, and look at some of this stuff over here. And you see this rust? See all this rust that's on this sign here? All this rust and old decaying paint and so on, right? And also I want to draw attention to this side also, right in here, looking at some of the details and some of the dirt and stuff that's going on here, especially these little bolts, these soft little bolts with these little cross beams here. Those are the two things I'm going to create for you now. I'm going to go in here and create a new file. And here we go. Let's make this a nice RGB, and I'll make it let's make it 960 by 780. Why those numbers? Because why not? Pixels. Actually, let's make it an pixels 960 by tell you what, 890. Sound like good numbers, right? Click OK, and there we have this file. So I'm going to start off with those little bolts and those beams on the side. Now, I put everything into a layer, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my layers right off the bat, and I'll create a layer right here. And to tell you the truth, that file back here is really big, so I'm going to close it. We don't need to see it anymore. Okay, it's so big it's going to take up a lot of memory in the background. Things are going to slow down. We don't want that to happen, right? So right here I have this layer, and I pretty much create everything with my pen tool. So I'm just going to create one big giant shape right here, which is going to serve as a piece of metal. And right here, I'm going to draw another little shape right here, which is going to be one of those little cross beams, just like that. Now, being a path, I can easily go in there and modify it, do anything I need to do just to fix it, right? I'm going to go over there and save those paths. So they are now saved. So what I'm going to do is first create the little panel over here. So I'm going to select this path and say, make it a selection. So now, make sure I'm in my little layer. We're going to call that layer wall, just to give it a name, right? And I'm going to fill it with a color. And I lost my file there. Okay, I'm going to fill it with a color. I'm going to fill it with that gray that I have there. Because what's going to happen now is I'm going to create another layer. In this layer, I'm going to call it texture. And in this layer is where I'm going to actually create the material that these things are going to be made of. So let me deselect this. And in that texture layer, I'm going to fill the whole layer with a nice color. Let's get some tones here. Let's get a kind of like a light beigey color like that, going to a darker version of that same color, maybe somewhere around here. There, that looks good. And I'm going to throw this gradient right through there. A long kind of a gradient, a reflective gradient just like that. In fact, maybe we'll just make this a little darker, just to give ourselves a little more variance there. There we go. Now we have this nice kind of a reflected gradient there. I'm going to give this a texture. Now, the texture is kind of like a rough kind of a paint, right? So I have a texture. Right here under texture, I have texturizer, which I love to use the sandstone mode for that filter, which we're waiting for the filter gallery to come up. There it is. Right now it's set to burlap. There's sandstone right there. Sandstone, which I'm going to bring up the scaling so I have really big chunks of it, and bring down the relief so it's not so strong. Just a soft kind of a texture right there. And my light could be coming from, let's just say, the top right. There, change the direction of the light. Click OK. So now I've got this texture. Now I'm going to duplicate that texture because I'm going to use it a few times. Let's turn it off right here. And I'm going to clip it right here with the wall, a little clip. Right now, I'm going to take the wall itself and give it a layer style. It's going to give it a little bevel and emboss. Let's have the light coming from this direction here, and we'll make it real strong and give it a little more of a size and soften it up. So now it starts to have this little rounded quality to it. See, just like that. Click OK. And just so we can really see it, I'm going to go to my background here, and I'm going to fill it with the background color. There we go. So we have that tone. All right, so now I'm going to create another layer right here, right above these two. Turn off my background, and I'm going to do a merge visible into that layer. But I want to keep my original two layers intact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my Option key, which is Alt on a PC, and say merge visible. And what that does is it merged those two layers into that single layer, but it kept the original layers intact, as you can see right there. I can now take that second layer and move it over just a little bit to the side here like that, and put it in back. Right there. There's this little space in between. Now, the fact that I still have my texture as a separate layer, I can now move that, because you see right here, you got a real similar look right there. All the way through here, you can see that's an exact duplicate of it. So by being able to move the texture now, I can go in there and I'm moving the texture by itself right there like that. I have now broken away from that similarity between those two shapes. I'm also going to go in there and give that wall a little drop shadow, just a little drop shadow inside, a little drop shadow right there, which I'm going to turn off the global light and have that shadow coming from this side here, right over here. So I'm going to get this little shadow, and it's actually hitting the wrong one. Let's make sure we get it on the right wall. That's this wall here. This wall, there we go. I'm in the wrong wall. That's what it was. Okay, let's go and give it a little drop shadow, which I'm going to turn on my global light and have that little shadow right inside there, that little tiny tone right inside. Now, remember that we have the little angled shape right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer right in between these two, which is where that little angle is going to be. In fact, we'll even call it angle. All right, and there I'm going to go to my path, and I'm going to select that path right there, and make it a selection. I'm going to fill it with that same tone, or any tone. It doesn't matter, because what's going to happen is that it is going to have that second texture. This second texture, which I'm going to bring down into here and clip it with that little angle. So now it's inside of there, which I'm going to give that layer a layer style as well. So go into the layer styles, and we'll give it that same bevel and emboss, and we'll make it a little stronger and a little larger and soften it up so it has its nice little angle now as well. There's its shape. Now on top of the whole thing, I'm going to create a little oval right in here. This is the little bolt that's holding this thing in place. I create a little circle just like that right there, and I fill it with a color. And now I'm going to go into my layer styles for that. I'm going to get rid of the color, take away the fill opacity, brought that down to 0. Anything that I do now is going to generate new pixels. Since the opacity is still at 100%, those new pixels will be visible, but the original color is gone. And what I'm going to do is give it a bevel and emboss. See, just like before, make it a little bigger and a little softer, and a slight drop shadow to it right there. I click OK, and that bolt right now is pretty sharp, so I'm simply going to go in there and blur it. A little Gaussian blur just to soften it up. And there we see that now it's this nice little bolt that's been painted over many times. Now comes the final touch, the rust. That rust is eating away into this paint. It's actually, the paint's peeling away. So let's go in here and get some colors for rust. I'm going to get a nice orange, a nice bright orange like that for my foreground, and for my background, I'll pick a nice deep brown like that. I got those two colors. I'm going to get my paintbrush. I'm going to choose the spatter brush, like that one right there, 46, which right now is going to give me a streak. So I go into my brush engine, and in my brush engine, I'm going to add a little variety to this. I'm going to go in there and give it a little spacing on the brush tip shapes, give it a little spacing, and right now we see a little pattern in there. So we're going to eliminate that pattern by going into my shape dynamics, where I'm going to turn off pen pressure, but I am going to play around with the size. So it changes size from tip to tip, and the angle. See, once I change the angle, now I have that nice variety happening in there. And then finally, I'll give it a little color dynamic, so it goes between the foreground and background, which right now is that orange and brown. Okay, so now we can get rid of the brush palette, and in that layer that I created, I'm going to go in here and start drawing a little bit of rust. There's a little rust there. Make the brush a little smaller, and we'll put a little rust along the edge of the bolt there, and maybe some over here. But this is eating into that paint, right? It's behind the paint. So I'm going to give the layer with this rust a layer style. Give it a little inner shadow, an inner shadow. Make that inner shadow really tight, so it's about maybe 2, and the size maybe 2 and make it much stronger. So I got this little dark edge now to my rust. So when I start to draw stuff, it's going to have this nice little edge to it. So as I start to draw more rust here and there, it looks like it's being eaten away from the actual piece of metal and leaving little holes inside the paint. Now, I hope you got something from that. Now remember, you might never have to do something exactly like this, but it's the techniques that were involved, the steps to that end result. Okay? So that's what I want you to concentrate on, because it might be something totally different. Using different colors might have a whole different thing except rust. Using a different texture, it'll be a different material than this heavily painted metal, and so on. So it's the techniques that are involved, not the end result. I hope you learned something from today's show. I look forward to the next show and showing you some more stuff. In the meantime, if there's something you want to see in particular, send me an email. Send it to bert@revision3.com. And some of the files that I've been using on the shows are available for download at revision3/Pixelperfect. Remember to play. That's the way to learn. Have fun playing. See you in the next show.